I received some fair warning from Mrs. Wadette to take it easy tonight, so I will. Resolution presented by Charles Berlinguet concerning hirings. Whereas the City of Clarence and Rockland's budget needs to be further examined, and the reports that have been submitted up to now indicates that it will be very difficult to allow the financing of capital expenditure projects and to balance the budget. And whereas the City of Clarence and Rockland has continuously increased since 2014 its staff proportionally to its demographic growth, that gives rise to a considerable increase to the budget. Be it resolved that we freeze immediately all hiring of new recruits, both on a full-time and a part-time basis, save and except those employees that would be hired to replace existing ones, and be it resolved that each department head assess needs of individual departments as well as operational costs, as well as savings that can be implemented to help finance those projects that are still required to be financed. Seconded by Councillor Lalonde. Any questions? Councillor Lalonde. Mr. Berlinguet, we cannot create a new job without going through budgetary exercises. So there won't be any new positions to be created from this point on until the end of this year. If this is one of your concerns, this is then not really an issue. You're saying that you don't want any new hires, but those that leave their current positions should be replaced. I'm just trying to reconcile both ideas. Well, I'm just saying that we should avoid creating any new positions from this point until the end of this current fiscal year. But in 2018, we might revisit that issue. Mr. Mayor, I was under the impression that you didn't want any positions to be created, any new positions to be created from this time until we adopt a budget. I'm asking that, given our budgetary constraints at present, and given capital expenditure projects that need still to be implemented, we're trying to come up with additional blocks of money to pay what needs to be paid. Now, I believe that we need to include money in the current budget, in our current expenditures, to pay those projects that are still outstanding. And we cannot just accumulate, debt upon debt. Well, our debt level is not at is not alarming. Our province states, and correct me, Mr. Douanier, if I'm in error here, if I'm mistaken, 25% of our income is earmarked for debt payment, and we're now at what, 8.5%. We're in a good shape right now. If we want to go ahead with Saint Joseph or Caron projects, we need to borrow money to make sure that these projects are completed. And often there are some development fees included in all of this that pay part of what needs to be paid. Sometimes we have no other choice but to go forward. If I take a look at the Caron project, we expanded the sewer system to ensure that future development projects will see the light of day, will be implemented. If we'd not done that, then we wouldn't have had any chance of doing so. We needed to also resort to some borrowing to pay for a 1 million surprise expenditure that Ontario Hydro heaped upon us. But we're certainly not in dire straits. I understand, Mr. Mayor, but the servicing of our debt is approximately 8 to 8.5%. So 8% of each dollar coming in goes to service the debt. Now, if this situation changes, it will change a lot of things. I do understand that a lot of municipalities today don't have the means to pay those projects that they need to implement. And in the eyes of regular taxpayers that see their tax burden increase year after year, it doesn't become an immediate problem for them, but for future generations. Well, we've already paid off a lot of debts, but we've also accrued additional debts with regards to ongoing additional projects. That's why we're at 8 to 8.5%. Well, the debt burden that we have today, that is more considerable than past debt burdens. Yes, but those projects were implemented initially by previous town councils. There are over and above 3,000 individuals that make use of the YMCA, for example. And what do we say? Well, we don't have any money, we won't help them operate? Well, those are decisions that are difficult to take. I know it's not very easy, but what I'm saying is that we have to stop spending blindly. We have to ensure that there's money that can be available to pay for what we need to do. Well, let me tell you, if we hadn't incurred any debt, we wouldn't have repaired any roads around here, or some roads. I understand, Mr. Berlinguet. I have to understand that because of the fact that he joined us a bit later on, during the course of this current mandate, our current mandate, a lot of changes have been brought about by our Chief Administrative Officer, but that yielded savings in positions, even though they reflect new positions. They really are not new positions, but replacement positions. I know that anything new needs to be approved by council. I just want to make sure that we have a proper resolution before us. I know your intent is a good one. Your intentions are good, but we, even though we were calling upon replacing existing positions, well, still town council needs to approve those replacements. Those people that purchase a house, for example, can have to contract a certain amount of debt. Some will purchase a house and make use of a mortgage, and for years will be called upon to pay for their house. The same rule applies for Caron, the Caron project that we had to borrow on, and it will reap millions of dividends in years to come. Of course, when we resort to increasing the debt ceiling, this is a matter of last resort for us. Councillor Lalonde, this is a decision that we have each and every year, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Berlinguet. Those are decisions that will be taken during the course of the month of November and October during the course of deliberations. Well, I thought that we were talking about the hiring freeze from this point on until the end of the fiscal year. Well, I have no problem with that. We're talking about looking at new hires for 2018, but for the fiscal year ending for 2017 should be subject to hiring freeze. Well, if you want to impose a hiring freeze next year, you have to bring it to the table for discussion during the course of budget discussions. Well, when we're talking about budget, Mr. Mayor, let us ask our department heads to come up with ideas to cut costs, to come up with money to help us to implement capital expenditure projects that need to be implemented. Well, those are discussions we'll enter into during budgetary talks. Yes, and as soon as we enter into budget talks, then we'll enter into those with an eraser in hand. And if there are some items that you do not like to see appearing on proposed budget line items, then make use of your eraser. I know that Mr. Belaguet, I'm entirely in agreement with what Mr. Belaguet is stating with regard to new hirings. And our debt load is not all that considerable. We're one of the fastest growing cities in the province of Ontario. I believe that our expenditures at council have been long thought out. We need to be proud of what we've done at a municipal level, but we need to keep, I'm in agreement that we need to keep our expenditures as low as we can. So, you want to come up with a resolution stating that new hirings will be capped or frozen until the new budget is implemented. Yes, Mr. Mayor, all I'm asking is that, and asking that individual department heads look into ways of cutting costs. Yes. Do I have someone to second this motion that calls for a hiring freeze until the end of this fiscal year? The hiring freeze that will also, well, for example, vacant positions that are left vacant will be replaced, but there are certain positions within the city of Clarence and Rockland's administration that should not be subject to a hiring freeze. For example, if there are some volunteer firemen that leave, well, they need to be replaced. Well, what we're talking about is not getting into the creation of new positions. If a volunteer firefighter leaves his or her position, then this is a replacement situation. It doesn't fall within the parameters of this particular resolution. So we can't hire anyone new in any new position before council decides upon this. All those in favor? Well, this will be brought at the next regular meeting of council then. Yes? Might I just propose the following? I know that there are some members of the public that are here with regard to item 9.1 and 9.2. Can we simply organize things so that people that are in attendance be made aware of what's going on with those items that they are preoccupied with? Well, yes. This is just a suggestion on my part, Mr. Mayor, because there are a lot of people here that are concerned with one particular item. 9.6, 9.8, Lacasse Road, and the zoning bylaws. So we'll just tackle item 9.6 and 9.8. No, we can deal with the question period now, but when we deal with the Lacasse Road, they'll need to listen to a lot of presentations. But if there are questions that they have, they can go back to the regular meeting of town council and ask them. Well, I'd just like to release these people that are here. So let's enter into a question period. If you have any questions, folks, please step up to the mic. You can come to the front and in your sweet voice tell us what objections you might have. I have no objections, really. I just like a clarification with regard to Lacasse Street, I believe, or road, and Mr. Darch. You know, Mr. Darch, you're always the one stuck talking here, so Mr. Darch can bring us a few points of clarifications. Well, I live at Christine Beer, 1236 Lacasse. I'm looking over the options, and I guess I'm wondering how you chose option A as a recommendation over option D. we relied on our engineering reports. Mr. Darch can go ahead and go into further details with regards to that. I believe we're dealing with risks or future risks. All right. Well, let me give you a little bit of a background to this. Earlier this year, there was a failure on the east side of the roadway, and immediately we ended up closing the road, and we hired Santec Engineering to do the work. Just a minute. Sir, do you understand English? Are you okay with English? It's because I can translate it for you if you wish me to do so. Speak louder because he has trouble hearing. Well, can I go to the podium then and maybe just give my presentation from there, because I understand that this gentleman is hard of hearing. That's fine. All right. Just if I go back a few minutes there, earlier in the year we had failure in the road, at which time we closed off the road. And then what we did, hold on, oh, there's no speaker on this. You'll have to speak louder, really. All it does is that it channels the sound to the TV cameras. Well, I'll try to speak as loud as I can then. Well, earlier in the year we had a slope failure, and then we closed the roadway, and then we retained Stantec Engineering to take a look at what was going on, because we were concerned about the slope stability, and we performed a geotechnical investigation, and they've since provided us with a report detailing options. We wanted to know what the options that we were to consider were, and we took a look at those, and I guess in summary they identified three. You can see four alternatives to the report, or four circumstances. There's another one that was talked about, which was the cul-de-sac, and Stantec referred to what was loading up the toe of the slope on that east side. That would have involved then clearing trees out, and you'd be required to put in rock or soil to stabilize that embankment. The key is stabilizing the embankment. That would have had some property implications, but then that would have been minimal. The other one that they looked at, they called it a flattening, and so if you can picture the slope that's there now, there's they probably flat that slope and load up the toe, but the other one flattens the toe where you wouldn't have a heavy load in the bottom. But what you have to do is to flatten it out and go well into the adjacent land. We take up much more land. On one side, yes, on one side. Yes, on the east side, yes, the east side. There's a lot on the east side where there's slope-related problem. Now that project they've estimated at $600,000 versus the $500,000 for that option A. And then you have to add in property acquisition costs, which we have no idea about right now, because you need to get into legal surveys, you need to get into a preliminary design to determine how much land is needed, and enter negotiations for that. And then we decided, and then when we presented this report, is that we recommended an option. Well, do we recommend an option now, or do we tell the option members of council, here are the options that we consider, and we'll be back with a subsequent report? I made the decision, and I think it's fairly obvious based on costs, that we should be going with option A. That's the department's recommendation to council tonight. And if approved, then what that allows us to do is this. We retain Stantec. We're asking for a further $20,000, to do the preliminary engineering, because we're about to walk into our budget process here, which is fairly aggressive. We're going to be looking at capital budget approvals in November, so we only did the preliminary engineering on that. We want them to do the cross sections. We want to know how much land. We want to identify costs and refer it to council. Recommending that this project proceed in such a fashion, you have to understand that council always reserves the right to approve or not approve of that. But I think that this one is a fairly critical project because it's compromising the operations of the roadway. And I think there's been some talk as to why didn't you go with the $40,000 option? Well, that's a spot repair, and that's it. And that does not address really does not address the stability issue. In other words, you can do that, and if you can find that when we had similar conditions this year where we had a lot of rain and the ground was saturated, but there's a risk to the municipality that we'd have a fairly significant slope failure. So in our opinion, the best solution is to go with this option A and cost that out and bring that forward to council. So Stantec will do a lot of the pre-engineering. They will determine what works, and they'll have to determine the cost of those works, and we'll essentially have a fairly accurate design developed at that stage. So if council approves funding, then we'll be able to proceed with this project during the winter months. I think that you've noticed in the report that there are there's a reference to species of risks. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there are certain species of birds, for example, and you're limited as to when you can affect those. And you want to trim your trees outside of a given season. So this being said, there are there are critical elements that we need to respect, and we hopefully will go ahead with this project early in the year. Tree pruning might be done during the winter months, and then as soon as winter conditions break, we'll be in a position to go with the project. But it's on the premise that we'll have approval of this for this project, and we'll refine that cost during the coming months if council adopts this report tonight. So in summary, that's the thought process that went into this project. Well, my other question is this: that slope continues for quite a distance. Yes, it does. Have you mentioned to Stantec to just focus on that area, or are they looking at, well, it happened here this year, but 5 years from now, it could happen just further down? Well, what we expect from them is that you want to look at where the failure stems from. We don't want to go in and do a repair operation only to find out that we have a problem further on. So that certainly is a discussion that we'll be having with them. But I just found that it was important to get this report forwarded to council's consideration now and adopt the preliminary engineering immediately so that we can have funding approval quickly. All right, thank you. Sir, any other questions then? Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Darch. Any questions? Apparently, they dug some holes in some areas. Yeah, we did bore holes. I don't have the results right now. Our project manager has those. Certainly, I can make them available if members of the community would like to get together with the department. We can arrange a meeting just to go over the results of these findings. Well, yes, and the results, yeah. But look, this firm is qualified in geotechnical expertise, and they're going to apply their level of expertise to let us know what we need to do. That's what I need them to do. That's why I need them to perform this analysis. That's why I didn't want to bring forward 3 or 4 options right here. It's going to cost money to look at each one. If I tell them to perform an assessment on each one, I believe that we have enough information right now to make a judgment call. And that's why I would like to recommend option A to council right now, and we'll have a consultant focus on that option and perform a cost analysis and the inspection and whatnot, rather than looking at four of them, which would increase costs. The more options you have, the more of a cost increase you'll have. I'd rather invest the money in a solid study that has been performed up to now. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Darch. Any other questions then? Any other questions, folks? Anything else? Yes. 1070 Landry Street. I'm here for the Trillium project and the change with regard to this project. I just want to understand that the recommendation right now is to have the lots around 672, 671 Landry declared a holding. Does that mean that no trees will be cut down if someone wants to build something in that area? I haven't seen the final plans as to what's being built. Well, I think we've had discussions with the contractor. They've changed the road to the other side so that they wouldn't impact any trees, but that doesn't tell me if there's going to be a fence there or whatsoever, or if there are any buildings there or a ditch. I know there's a creek in the tree area, and on their projected plan, we don't know yet where the creek or whatever you can call it will be dug. My question right now, of course, we're in a holding situation. Nothing will be sold, of course, but that does not tell me if anything is going to be done on those properties. Good question. It's up to Mr. Darch. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead. I think I'd mentioned this at the Planning Committee, but you see, this is in consideration of a zoning amendment. The issue of the development, the subdivision in there, that was subject to previous approval, where we got into screening, setbacks, tree cutting, and the like. Now, this really is a separate issue, dealing solely with the minimum distance separation requirement. It has nothing else to do with anything else? No. In my opinion, no. I believe that the approval for the development of the subdivision and that this gentleman's concerns, I believe, were dealt with at the approval of the subdivision agreement. This is a zoning amendment, which is putting notice on title with respect to minimum distance separation. Now, I know that the decision that was made at Planning Committee, essentially to put a hold or a freeze on 8 lots, had been arrived at, but I believe that there's already been considerable discussion with regards to approval of the subdivision. So even if there's a holding, that doesn't prevent them from cutting the trees. Is that what you're saying? Well, I think that lots are being sold, are they not? The lots are being sold. The owner of the lot has decided, no. Holding to me means that they can't build a house. That's my understanding of things. And because of the holding, and give the consensus of the last meeting that was arrived at, that we went to, is that there's a holding provision that's in effect. And we agreed, well, there was a consensus. It was recommended by the committee to have a holding on those properties, to have at least the trees and everything untouched. But the recommendation does not state that the trees will be kept, however. But that has nothing to do, though, with tonight's decision that council needs to arrive at, right? Well, I mean, I would think that the holding means that there won't be any development taking place on those lands. So by extension, there wouldn't be any cuttings of trees and the like until there was a lifting of that holding zone. I can confirm that with members of council, but I guess tonight we're dealing with the zoning, because really there is no bylaw stopping anybody from clear cutting. Right now, you can go in at any farm. You can see it all over the place. There is no rule. The county will not take the position on stopping clear cutting. It's their call. And they're now saying that if we want it, and they just came out with that, that if we want to apply the law in our municipality, they will accept us making a request for that, which is something that council will have to look into. This is something that just came up. Now, you see, before we were a two-tier government, and the higher tier had precedence on this. Well, that's why they're now handing it over. But as far as trees go for tonight, there is no decision taken on this. Well, it's the trees do filter the air. That in term prevents. Well, there's nothing in Ontario. In Ontario that there's nothing in Ontario that prevents us to do this. But I mean, to hold the properties to build is the reason to not have the trees cut. Well, the MBS and the cutting of trees, or the NDS, is for smells and farming and odors and all this, whereas clear cutting or cutting the trees has nothing to do with the MDS. Now, I know that it works as a barrier or a fence, but it has nothing to do. They don't work together. And there's not much protection in the province or in the county for clear cutting. If you go around in back roads, you'll see all kinds of clear cutting going on right now, and there's nothing anybody can do about this. If you have a land, you can do pretty much what you want to do with it with regard to trees. I don't know if we can discuss it now, sir, but as we discuss it, whatever we decide will prevail. But do you know if developers there are interested in conserving trees? Well, it concerns a zoning change. It has nothing to do with someone's wishes or not. Well, you see, that's something that will be resolved through an ongoing conversation between both parties. Well, Mr. Ledon, it states here that the Planning Committee recommends that Lot 87 and 94 of the site lot be subject to DMS regulations. So which means that these 7 or 8 lots cannot be built upon. Is that what it is, Dave? You know, we're talking in there that lots 87 to 94 will not be able to be built on. Well, that was the recommendation coming out of their planning committee. Are there any other developments? Is there any other further development on that? No. I think that the idea was to put them under one matter to be considered with regard to holding provisions that could impact it. Now, I don't know what the developer wants to do. I mean, I think that clearly there's probably a view on behalf of the developer that those lots are key to the viability of this development. But according to this, they cannot build on lot 87 to 94. Well, in keeping with the planning committee and the DMS provisions. Councillor Grimard? Well, we're in the midst of a question period here, Mr. Mayor. Well, this will be discussed at the next resolution that we're called upon to consider. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask them. No, those are all the questions I had. Any other questions then? Yes. Yes. Please, 345 Lorraine. We approached the residents some time ago, Mr. Mayor, and we told them that all of their concerns would likely be addressed. would be looked into and go through the design process. I mean, the design process, there all the studies have been done. Nature studies, hydrogeological studies were performed, trees, significant species at risk, all that stuff. Now, we can't fix our lot fabric until that's all done. And at the same time, Mr. Mayor, very likely these studies will try to save as many trees as possible. Losing 8 lots is not an option for us. It makes the project non-viable, and I don't think we be able to proceed with losing those lots. We can continue our discussions with the property owners, the neighbors, and we're pretty sure that we can satisfy their concerns with the design that will be advanced. Well, thank you, sir. Any other questions? Any other questions then? Anything else? Thank you then. All right. Now, do you wish to tackle item 9.8? Yes, let's go on to item 9.8, shall we? Lacasse Road. Mr. Lalonde, André? That the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approves option A, detailed in report INF 2017-055, to correct the road failure which is associated with budgetary requirements, and that Stantec Engineering be retained to provide engineering services for a limit of $20,000 to be funded from the Roads Reserve Fund. Seconded by Councillor Simard. Any questions? Mr. Mayor, I'd have a question. I'd like to bring an amendment to this motion. I'd ask that Stantec be approached initially and ask it to give us a complete overview of what needs to be done. Given the discussions that we've entered into, this $500,000 that comes into play at present might be much higher. We're going to get a better idea how much it's going to cost after Stantec does this. Well, we need to do the preliminary engineering to refine your costs, to refine them. Right now, we're talking about those Class A and Class B level estimates, but it's a fairly high level. And I think that once they do the cross sections and find the property requirements, then we'll have a better estimate to bring forward to the budget deliberations. It is written $20,000 for Stantec, but when I look at the bill at the end, it's $26,416. Well, what we did was that we added up. If you take a look at the first 3 work levels there, I went through that as well. Page 219. Yes, page 219. Just bear with me. But they've identified a work plan for the entire project. And excuse me just a sec, excuse me. And on page 219, yes, if you look at what they refer to as milestones 1, 2, and 3, when you add those up, it comes up to $15,000. The remaining 2 would be dealt with as part of the budget process, getting into more of the detailed design and the like. I know that the table does add up to $15,000, the one they provided to us. Any other questions? All those in favor? That we go ahead with option A, to hire Stantec Engineering for $20,000 to perform an assessment. Yes, yes. So all those in favor? Carried. All right then. All right, carried. Carried. Fine. Let's go on now to item 9.6. Zoning amendment. Zoning bylaw amendment, Trillium Subdivision. Councillor Grimald. Yes. Being that the applicant wishes to amend the zoning bylaw for the whole subdivision in order to change the zone from the rural to rural residential and parks and open space, and also wish to amend zoning 18 for the proposed lots to authorize relief from the minimum distance separation. Be it resolved that conditions of the draft plan approval be amended to request that blocks be created instead of lots for 87 to 94 of the draft plan, and be it resolved that the planning committee recommends that lots 87 to 94 of the draft plan be the only lots subject to the MDS guidelines, and that following review of MDS guidelines, the department does not recommend that MDS 1 be reduced. Be it resolved also that Council approves bylaw number 2017-101, the zoning bylaw 2016-10, in order to change the zoning of the property known as part of Law 21, Concession 2OS, from rural RU zone to rural residential, holding RRH zone, rural residential exception 6, holding RRA 6H, rural residential exception 7, holding RR7H, and parks and open space OS as recommended by the Infrastructure and Planning Department. Any new information as to this, Mr. Darch? No, I think this extends from discussions that we had with the planning committee, and the committee determined that we were going to freeze the lots and put a holding zone designation on it. I think that what's new on this is that there were some subsequent discussions with the developer, and I guess that they've assessed the conditions that were approved by the planning committee, and I think that you've heard from Mr. Kurtz just a few minutes ago that the loss of those lots makes this development not viable. So I guess that the discussion to be had here this evening is this: do we hold to the planning committee's recommendation of freezing those lots, or do we release those lots and let the development proceed? All of the 19 lots would proceed, not just the 11 of those 19. I mean, there are different views on this from our staff to the consultant's planner. But the bottom line on this one, and I think I mentioned it, is this: the planning committee, OMAFRA, has guidelines about MDS, and they are guidelines. They are intended to address older issues or other issues. There's a specific calculation that is done for that. There is an ability to grant exemptions, and we feel, I guess, that the test that needs to be made for these exceptions do not satisfy Type B development. At the end of the day, it becomes a decision that Council ultimately makes as to whether or not it wishes to freeze the lots. And with this comment, and I want to choose my words carefully here, the decision that was made at Planning Committee really didn't deal with MDS, because there are some lots that are allowed to develop that are still in the MDS arc, and then there are some lands that were frozen that are in it, and I think there are one or two that are outside. There's a real hybrid of it, and I felt more of the discussion at Planning Committee was trying to maybe screen the existing development from this new development. So if members of council are concerned about, OMAFRA or somebody raising an objection, going to the board or whatnot, I'm not convinced on the basis of discussions I've had with Mr. O'Neill, the rural planner, that they would do that. They strongly encourage council to follow the MDS results, but I don't think there's a policing operation out there for that. But, appeals can come from any different number of avenues. The developer, residents, OMAFRA. I can't tell members of council what will happen in the future, so I think you have to make a decision based on all the facts that you have and decide whether you want to uphold the planning committee recommendation or you want to modify that. One modification, I guess in the extreme, would be to allow all of the 19 lots to proceed to development. Councillor Levert, Mr. Darch, as to MDS guidelines, they call them guidelines. Are they like recommendations, or are they actual guidelines that we need to absolutely follow? Guidelines to me are just that. They encourage you to follow them. I mean, if it were to be stronger, I wouldn't use the word guidelines. I mean, they strongly encourage you to follow them, but they stop short of saying you must. Okay, so I think that that's the dilemma that we have, and primarily, MDS is dealing with odor control. And I mean, you can strike an arc on a plan. That doesn't mean to say that the odors are going to come to that arc and stop. I mean, there's just a practical thing that it's going to carry on. Now, the prevailing winds are west to east, away from the development, but as we all know, winds shift. And I think at the planning committee meeting, some of the owners in the area said, well, we smell it from time to time. Putting a covenant on title is a way of cautioning future owners that they are in a zone like this. My experience has been a lot of times, and it's not the fault of the city or anything like that, but a lot of times, and we don't know why this is the case, but lawyers don't draw it to the attention of prospective purchasers. They get into it and they make a reference to it saying, I didn't know about that. That happens with any number of things, but it's a buyer beware issue. But their issue then is with the lawyer and not the city. As long as we make sure that we've put a proper covenant on title advising them, it is a mechanism. I'm not saying it's foolproof, though. But we have to keep in mind that these are laws, and I believe that 2 kilometers from 2 farms, when they do spread the manure, I do smell it, and I live 2 kilometers from those farms. So the buffer zone for me means nothing to me. The smell is going to happen anyway if the wind prevails that way. It's like I say, I'm for all these developments. We have to keep it going. We can't stop a full development because of the smell, because we are in country. The farms are there. Andre, the problem I have is that we've already approved other subdivisions. There's one that Michel was mentioning that are barely 600 meters from a farm. In Clarence Creek, we have a subdivision next to a slaughterhouse. You can't tell me, that the odors coming out of that place are better than any other farm. It's the same thing. So to me, when you have a prospective buyer coming in to any project, well, that person will ultimately go and visit the land and see where they would want to have their house. They'll see that. They'll see that there's a farm next door. They'll ask questions. And so to me, I don't see it as, well, why would there be a block lost if the developer has everything else lined up? It's a buyer beware situation. If you go to purchase something that expensive, you're going to go and visit and ask questions. As Michel stated, even if that specific farm spreads manure, we smell it in Clarence Creek. So to me, it's a non-issue. Councillor Berlinguet? Well, I seem to recall that modifications to MDS regulations were implemented after the property had been initially planned. There were changes made after the fact, in other words, right? I believe MDS was implemented or brought in after Mr. Potvin had bought the lot. Or is that it? I'm not sure. Yeah. Well, it is correct. The radius was there prior as well. It's not as if it popped out of the municipal landscape. The minimal distance was what came into play. So, you see, look, MDS came into play. I saw 2 different dates. one in 1995 and early in 2000, MDS was there. And I think the radius would have been different back then. I'm not saying, though, that it would have gone from what we're seeing right now down to 250, sort of the minimum. It wouldn't have gone down that much, but it would have been less. But parts of this development still would have been captured in that arc. Okay, but was that normal at the time? Was it normal practice? You know, if someone, was it known? Well, Mr. Lalonde, well, I just like to say that we have to be very careful when we want to deviate from the guidelines. I know of two cases, Mr. Mayor, one in Embrun, whereby the developer lost because there was a farm next to it and just at the entrance east to it, entrance of Embrun, and the other one was east of Castleman. That one didn't go to court, but they decided to close the mobile home park that was there because they were complaining about the smell, the odor. Councillor Grimard, I was sitting on the planning committee, and I find that this new information that you're bringing about MDS tonight very enlightening. I wish it would have been explained to us better. It's a guideline. I agree now that we have an L saying the smell won't bother anybody past the L-shaped configuration. And I think it's a lack of maybe explanation that was given at the time. We made a decision based on MDS and not zoning, though. And I think that's where MDS is completely different. It's not a law, it's a guideline. I hear what you're saying. I remember originally, before MDS came and the residents in that area had problems, we had come to a consensus. It wasn't perfect, but the developer was agreeing to leave about 10 meters, 30 feet of trees of those lots back into the residences. The developer decided also to move a road south to avoid having a road going by a populated or built up residential area. It's just, you see, that we receive information as we go along, and what you're telling us today is that MDS is a guideline, but it's not something that, well, it gives us an idea as to what to be careful about. But I do remember that the residents there told us that it smelled every day. I remember them saying that. Even if we block something, it's still going to smell. I don't think this was explained well enough, however. I understand much better what you're saying based on the discussion that we're having now. Yes, and I don't want to leave the impression, though, that I didn't support the staff report, because I think in the strictest sense they're applying the provincial policy. These are guidelines, but they strongly encourage council to adopt the findings of MDS. But it won't go that one step and further and oblige that. There's nothing to say that somebody will not decide to take it to the OMB, but I think that's something that council has to assess. I would think that if somebody takes it to the OMB, let's say for sake of argument, is that the 8 lots are lifted right now and somebody challenges that, the developer would have then to defend that action in front of the OMB. They would have their planners defend it, and I think our planner might get called, but her position's already on record. And then there would be a ruling on it. But I think this would all happen before the development took place. So, you know, it's a judgment call you have to make. I wish it would be more definitive, where you could say we have to do this, but I can't quite go that far. I know what the spirit of it is, but I guess I'm looking at the issue of the arc and the winds, and I still think that the odors, if it's all about odor control, it's going to go beyond that arc. And I think that you have to just assess, is that important? But what it comes to right now is that we have a development, and because of smell, and we decide, well, the planning committee, their recommendation was to do a block or a lot, because the smell exists, the developer won't be able to do his project, but the smell won't stop at that block. Well, if the wind changes direction, the whole development is going to come into jeopardy because the wind is not going to stop at a 250 feet imaginary wall, if you wish. That's it. Do I have someone to second this resolution? I'm asking then, who's in favor of this resolution? Who's opposed? So, the motion has been defeated. Can someone come up with a new resolution? With a new one? I think, as we've pointed out, this is a development that's been approved. I appreciate what Mr. Darch has said. We should adhere to the guidelines, but honestly, Mr. Mayor, we're trying to come up with a compromise, but either the project goes or does not. I think that we should go ahead, not recognizing that NDS applies, on the condition, as we said, that we try to come up with a workable solution for the nearby neighbors, and that this be reflected on the deed also. Seconded. Do I have someone to second this? Just to clarify things, is that you'd like to allow zoning, so that the Committee of the Whole's recommendation is to allow zoning and to ensure that something be registered on title with regards to an odor in keeping with MDS guidelines. Well, we're not talking about MDS guidelines. We're just talking about a zoning bylaw that needs to be amended. Are you talking about MDS in this particular amended resolution? No, this will not be alluded to. It will not be applied. As Carl had mentioned, the developer had offered to have a line of trees left over there. It seems that we'd spoken about a 30 or some odd feet in between the residents already established that would remain standing, that would afford a buffer to those there. And I think that we're talking about the east side. Both properties are set back, and I believe that the developer, with regard to this line of trees, will leave this tree line or a tree area standing to act as a sort of buffer, if you wish. So, would this be part and parcel of the subdivision agreement? Well, it has nothing to do with the zoning. That might be a condition included in the recommendation. Well, no. It'll be included in a subdivision plan, a plan of subdivision. So I'll need an amendment to this plan of subdivision also. What I'll do, Mr. Mayor, is that I'll speak with our planning department, and when it comes time to deal with this again at council, I'll come up with a recommendation to that effect. What I've stated is the following, though, is to allow the change to the zoning bylaw as amended, to put to notify on title with regard to odor situations, and that the subdivision agreement stipulate that a tree line be kept standing. Mr. Mayor, I'm not in favor, because if this ever is heard by the OMB people might say, hey, Councillor Lalonde, it seemed as if to us that you were cognizant of the prevailing laws. I'm not against the development. All right, seconded by Councillor Levert. Then all those in favor? Carried. The majority has voted in favor of the zoning change, with a line of trees that do remain. Let's go back now to item 9.1, interior ice rink and slab rental policy. That the Committee of the Whole hereby recommends to Municipal Council to adopt policy LO 2017-02, being a policy to establish the guidelines of the interior ice rink and slab rental, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Municipal Council to accept policy LOI 2017-02 to be effective as September 1st, 2017, and that policy LO 12003-81 be repealed as recommended. Seconded by Councillor Lalonde. Any questions, Councillor Lalonde? We have to be wary, fellow council members, in keeping with an amendment and in keeping with the recommendation. I'm going to have Jean-Luc explain it to us further. So, the amendment that we discussed with Mr. Lalonde deals with that period of time after the March break. So, we're asking that to compel people to rent ice rink times during those, unoccupied times, to offer the same rates, $200 per hour for tournaments. So any tournaments that would be set up after the March break could be eligible to a $200 ice rink rental fee. So the prevalent thought behind all of this is this, Mr. Mayor. There are two major tournaments that potentially might be impacted. There's the Optimists Club hockey tournament, and they never received a preferential rate for a community-based activity. This is their main fundraising activity. That's right. So, given this amendment, it will allow these good folks to save approximately $35 plus GST on an hourly basis. That would be the equivalent of what we would offer folks that make use of the ice rink during the course of a winter carnival. Mr. Jubainville is still responsible for pipes not breaking when the ice rink is in use? Yes. I'd just like to make a comment, though. What we're doing is within a regular season of operation. If anybody is asking for ice rental after the 15th of April and we're closing on the 30th of March, it has to be within regular season activities. We've already had tournaments held after the ice rink has been officially closed. Normally we discourage this practice because the arena has not has been built to accommodate out of season operations. Page 6 here does not deal with the Clarence Creek Arena at all. Is this something we omitted when drafting the agreement? Take a look at page 6. You mean page 6 of the said agreement? Yes, for item number 5, for discussion purposes. Yes, major changes were brought about in contrast to the old policy that did prevail, but the cost for ice rental would be the same. Yes, these costs are included in the appendix. I see. I'm wondering why the Clarence Creek Arena was not mentioned. It's that each individual line items on page 5 represent minor changes brought to the existing or the old policy. Any questions then? All those in favor? Thank you. So, Mr. Mayor, this is the policy as amended? Yes. With the addition that has been suggested. Well, I don't have this amendment, but I imagine that I'll obtain from Mr. Jubainville the final document as amended. Yes, you'll do that tonight, Mr. Jubainville. If not tonight, first thing tomorrow morning. Item 9.2, draft plan of subdivision, block 56. Councillor Grimard, Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approves Mr. Steve Pence's of Loptech Engineering Consultant for Riverlands Consulting with approval conditions listed in Section 6 with regard to Report 1775-R. I just want to be clear. with regards to the plan that we're approving to the new lots and attachments. This is the plan that we're approving that shows 31 lots, right? Whom am I addressing this to, by the way? Oh, you're talking to yourself right now. Huh. It's mentioned to the report that there will be a pathway going into lot number 17, but it's not indicated in the plan. The plan details the potential buyers, and it should indicate also potential right-of-way there. Well, I don't have the answer on hand. It's just to approve a change of zoning, and she did mention in the design plan that this was to be mentioned, that path was going to be dealt with. But yes, well, you see, the new lots are here. Yes, yes, that's for the pedestrian path. Yes, yes, and that's Councillor Lalonde, page 31, Mr. Darch. Item 33. All the public utilities, including electricity, cable, water, gas, and phone, shall be underground. We just forgot the term sewers in all of this. Well, if the sewers are not underground, I think we're going to have a problem. That's because we're mentioning all the others, Mr. Mayor, all of what these deal with public utilities, electricity, gas, public utilities. Yes, I guess, yes. I guess you're referring to storm sewers. Should they be included in the list? Storm and sanitary sewers. Well, I can confirm that there is a sewer there, but I think that public utilities would capture that. Maybe it's been in error. It's been dropped inadvertently. Should we not put an etc. As a prevalent term? Well, public utilities, as he's mentioned, do include this. Well, I mean, including, it might not be a comprehensive list of everything, yeah, but it's a public utility. All those in favor? Carried then. Thank you. Amendment to the Financial Assistance Program for Culture and Arts. Councillor Lalonde André. Fine. Mr. Mayor, I believe, is he going to read the resolution or not? Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole hereby recommends to Municipal Council to adopt the financial support program for artistic and cultural activities of the City of Clarence and Rockland as recommended. Seconded by Councillor Simard. Questions? All those in favor? That wasn't as hard as it appeared to be, was it? No? Mr. Mayor? You really breezed through that one. Yes. All right then. Hard to breeze through things like that, but let's go on now to assessment of the suitability of buildings. Jean-Marc Lalonde Arena, Community Services Garage. Councillor Levert, that the Committee of the Whole hereby recommends to Municipal Council to mandate Community Services to proceed with the evaluation of costs related to the concept plans and specifications of the adaptation of the project of the Jean-Marc Lalonde Arena as presented in Report LOI 2017-08-05 in order to include the project during the budgetary discussions as recommended. Seconded by Councillor André Lalonde. Any questions then? Councillor Grimard? I might have a question as to this. Well, look, go ahead. Let's get the ball rolling, shall we, folks? Yes, I know. It's getting late. I know that we're heading towards a particular direction. I would have preferred to have other or alternate options. I believe this is the one that's recommended. This is a plan that you recommend that we follow, but we haven't been presented with other options. Well, in the report, there are some alternate options that were elaborated, but they were not feasible options. So, given our recommendations, we asked you to follow along with this feasible recommendations that we could live with. The others were not suitable for our needs. Let me tell you that this building is quite useful. We know that all arenas that were built outside of town, well, people then transfer to the downtown core. This phenomena occurs in Ottawa, in Washington. It happened everywhere in those the national hockey with where national hockey league teams are established. As of the 1st of July, Mr. Mayor, where would we have hosted the youth games if we would not have had the arena to work with? Right now, there's ball hockey being played during the summer months. There's a bit of roller derby activities. The Air Cadets make use of this facility also. And these, as well as other activities that are enumerated in the report. We're not tearing down the arena as a whole because a great part of this arena will be used by ratepayers, but the surface of the ice rink, half of this surface, would be used for recreational purposes, for schools, and for community purposes. And this is, you've raised a very viable point also. During the course of the Canada Day festivities, and I've taken a look at what was done this year, within 3/4 of that surface within the ice rink, all of the activities that were held during the Canada Day festivities were held within 3/4 of the surface of that particular ice rink area. Because we're removing, are we removing any seating facilities? No. But as things stand, we're not even at that stage yet. All we're asking is, can we bring this item to your attention for further consideration? We'd like to gauge whether or not Council's wish is to get involved in this. I've taken a look at what Hawkesbury has done with their sportsplex, and they've done extraordinary things. I'm in agreement with Mr. Lalonde to try and maximize and to conserve as much ice rink surface as we can. What Mr. Lalonde states is quite true. Let us maximize the use of that ice rink surface even during the summer months so that it can be deemed a multifunctional building. Also, the plan states, or the plans state that we're looking into the construction of a potential new arena. Well, no, the study states that there's enough ice rink, there are enough ice rink facilities available for our area in this year and in coming years. I wouldn't get rid of the refrigeration equipment that's still there because we might need it one day. There were more than 300 youngsters playing in 2011, and now there are less than 100 making use of that facility. I saw some walking along to get there along Highway 17 during the winter time to get there, and given new construction to be that will be ongoing along Highway 17, even less will get there. Well, given our report, the refrigeration system has been shut down and has been right tagged since 2011. The CSSA states that this refrigeration system cannot be reanimated, if I might use that term, cannot be repurposed before all piping is looked into in a very detailed fashion. And let me tell you that some at the Jean-Marc Lalonde, some refrigeration systems at the Jean-Marc Lalonde some systems have been there since 1971. Well, look, if people are bothered by the Jean-Marc Lalonde arena, let them just change the name. Well, let's not go there, Councillor Lalonde. The arena has been closed up since 2011. Well, they received an offer in 2014. We never received an offer to purchase. My God, this offer to purchase stemmed from me, not for the purchase, but for the rental of this building. But we're getting far afield here. I hope that we'll conserve this building and its facilities for coming events. Let's say that some people sometimes build domes that flatten down. The roof would flatten down and might become unusable. Well, if we make, as Mr. Boucher stated, proper use of at least 3/4 of the ice rink surface without any problem, as was the case with Canada Day festivities, well, that's fine. Is everyone then in favor of the recommendation to determine what? Well, I would just like to say to Councillor Lalonde that I think that the purpose behind all of this is to breathe new life in this arena, to come up with a new sense of mission for this building. It's important for us to conserve this building. That's the purpose behind our that underlines our discussion. You see, this is a centrally located facility. That's fine, and it's located within a park. Any other questions? I would like us, because we don't know what the future reserves for us, I would like that the entire surface of the arena remain intact. Given all three new projects that have been announced, 1,500 new homes to be built in the coming years. We don't know what's going to happen with Highway 174 and adjoining projects. I would like that this ice rink be kept intact. We were asked to only keep 75% of this surface intact, but I would like it to be kept 100% intact. I understand the plan that Mr. Lalonde has put forward. Well, this is not feasible given that the community services will move to the Chamberlain Street venue. And we need to afford them to have sufficient space also to work there. The help center will be moved into the Jean-Marc Lalonde Arena building. We need to have a building that makes efficient use of community assets. And according to me, the plan put forward is a very good one. I agree with you. It's a very good plan. For example, the food bank will be located upstairs in that building. We haven't approved anything yet, really, Councillor Lalonde. I remember that Councillor Levert had suggested that we should make use of that we should move the exterior rink inside, and we were told it's impossible because those interior rinks will not freeze over. That's impossible. But let me tell you, when you're working with inside rinks, you can easily freeze those over with a tubing system, as well as outside rinks that can be properly used. With properly maintained outside rinks can be also feasible. Let's go on to the next item, the Edwards Street drainage culvert. It's a matter to send this to the United Counties because they share facilities, these particular facilities with us. This is something that I'll bring to your attention during the time at the next meeting. Do you need a resolution? Yes. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council adopt a resolution to request the United Counties of Prescott-Russell to enter into a cost-sharing maintenance agreement with the City of Clarence and Rockland with respect to the drainage cross culvert on Edwards Street in the vicinity of County Road 17. Seconded by Councillor Lalonde. Is there mention here of the cost? I didn't see it. Did we have to Or are we called upon to split it halfway, which is fine? What are we talking about cost-wise, dollar-wise? Yes. I mean, the annual maintenance costs, I don't think, are significant. I would guess if you spent maybe $1,000 a year tops on that, that would be enough. But it's more when you go down the road a bit, when you get into the replacement cost of it. This is a fairly new plastic culvert. I think it's going to outlast all of us here. Well, speak for yourself. Well, this year I think we had a problem because it was blocked. Once we took care of the blockage, everything went well. But it was amazing when everything was unblocked there. It was like a fountain. But it is a fairly new pipe. But we just get into those discussions between ourselves and the counties as to who owns it. But it's so far up Edward Street saying that okay, we'll do it. But your road drainage along Highway 17 is very dependent. Well, it will cover us down the road. If we don't have a resolution approved by council, I can't bring it. Mrs. Simard, for future maintenance reasons, why aren't we asking them to cover it now? Well, there's not much maintenance to it now, as Mr. Dart stated. Did we pay something to fix it? No, we didn't fix it. There's soil that fell on the other side and it blocked the area. It was very minimal damage. But down the future, like Mr. Dart just said, if there are many changes to be implemented, they should be responsible for it. The United Counties should. I expect that the amount of money will be very high for that repair. It's not only the culvert, but ditches on both sides. Because to the west, I remember MTO was going to build a gate to prevent the water from coming in to the river when they were responsible for the road. And then on the east, when we dug there, it cost over $200,000. Saint-Pierre dug that area from Pouliot down to Mr. Henry's pond there. Well, we're not fixing anything, not right now, but I would like to work with the county to see if we can improve the drainage along there, and most of that in my mind would be in their court because it runs along the highway in a westerly direction, and if we don't have a resolution, they can't go ahead. If they don't have a resolution stemming from our council, they can't go ahead. It's a critical piece of our infrastructure, and we need to take that into consideration. So all those in favor then? Carried. Thank you. Next item, fire underwriters survey results. Councillor Grimard, it's yours. Yes. We'll just have to give him a bit of attention because he feels all alone there in the corner. The letter dealing with classification levels with regards to the Clarence and Rockland Town be received and filed. Are you good with that? All those in favor? Carried. Other items? Are there any other questions that you may ask? You have 4 minutes left. Mrs. Ouellette has just warned me that we have 4 minutes left. Any questions for department heads? Mr. Lalonde, Mr. Darch, can you brief council on what's being done on Céline Street? It's done. It's done. All right. Céline. All right. Okay, Céline. Well, Céline, as you'll recall, this is one that we took control of. That's the project we took control of. The contractor went in several weeks ago, performed some excavation work, and then the work was suspended. I'll call it that. Since then, they've mobilized today. They'll be carrying on, and there's an end date for that contract of September 1st. I think that one of the reasons for the delay that I've heard today was the fact that there was some special manholes and catch basins that needed to be secured. This is what I heard. Yes. Well, we were worried about sediment pockets being caught up there. Yes. I was somewhat sensitive of that because the residents had been through a fair bit, and once the contractors had gotten involved, well, they incurred delays because of those catch basins, but they'll complete the work. They'll carry on. So we should make that September 1st deadline, plus or minus a day or two. Any other questions? Councillor Lalonde, do we still have a patrol person at night that drives around to report all or any deficiencies? I believe so, we do have. I can double check that with you. I wasn't sure if it was whether it was in the winter months. Did we not say that we needed one for the winter and one for the summer? Well, the road patrol were in were enacted in the wintertime, but I'm not too sure if they were enacted during the summertime. The street lights. The street lights are checked in the wintertime. I'm sorry. Okay, let's. Okay. Road patrol follows all of the provincial requirements. So some roads are traveled every day, and we have someone drive some of the main roads, and each road in the city, the municipality, has a category. Some roads will need to be checked once a week, others need to be checked once a month. Laurier needs to be checked daily. I guess that, I just like to provide you with a normal view, but nobody reported a burnt streetlight. Has anybody ever done that? No, not yet. In the winter, yes, some street lines have been reported as being burnt. There have been quite a few that burnt out. In the wintertime, yeah. Councillor Guillemard? No. Well, people are, through social media, sir, there seemed to be a discussion of certain events that happened in various school areas, DHS, Carrefour Jeunesse, during the night. According to what I'm reading, a lot of youths, a lot of gatherings, some vehicles making a lot of noise. Can you please check with our bylaw people and ask them to perform extra patrols in those areas? If they give our officers agent status, then they can enforce our bylaws on private property. And that would be, because it seems as if there's a lot of noise on social media, also combined with poor lighting in some areas, in some of those. Well, we don't typically schedule bylaw officers for that purpose, and that's, if you want to try to improve the situation, though, we can certainly earmark some officers for, or detail them for that particular purpose. So even on the weekends, we don't have any. I'd like to say that we can't, schedule special projects, but in the past, when we detailed people for, special coverage or Sunday coverage, it didn't warrant the bother, really. There weren't any incidents reported. Well, we had report of broken windows. I know it's a police matter, of course, but if we had more officers, I completely forgot, of course, that the OPP also patrolled that area. I've seen bylaw officers that did show up, that were called initially, and that showed up a bit later on the scene. Councillor Lalonde, question also, Mr. Mayor. I know that 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was stated that we had an announcement from Ottawa with regard to the widening of Highway 17. Well, I spoke to Grant Craig this morning, and we're supposed to have an answer as to this ongoing process in 2 weeks' time. And if I don't have an answer from Mr. Craig within the next 2 weeks, I'll have a speech to make to the public. And if Mr. Grant has not answered us within the next 2 weeks, we were going to try to insist to have a meeting with Mrs. Wynne, Premier Wynne. Something will happen very soon. Adjournment then called at 9:30. Thank you then.